She started leaving her phone in another room during dinner. Just a small, almost forgettable decision made one random Tuesday. Nothing dramatic happened. No sudden transformation. But 6 months later, she noticed something she hadn't expected. Conversations felt different, longer, deeper, like her attention had somehow gotten easier to hold on to, not just at dinner, but everywhere. That's the strange thing about how the brain actually changes. It rarely happens through some single dramatic event. It happens through small, repeated actions, the ones nobody thinks twice about, quietly reinforcing certain neural pathways while letting others fade, day after day, until an entirely different pattern of thinking has taken shape without anyone deciding to build it on purpose. Today, I want to walk through 9 specific daily habits that are actively reshaping the brain, right now, in real time, for almost everyone watching this video. Some of these habits build something valuable, others quietly erode it. I'll explain the actual mechanism behind each one and where the real long-term impact tends to show up. Habit 1. Checking a phone first thing in the morning. This is one of the most common habits on this entire list, and also one of the most consequential, precisely because of when it happens. The first few minutes after waking up are a period when the brain is unusually receptive, still transitioning out of a slower, more impressionable state. Filling that specific window with a stream of notifications, headlines, and other people's curated lives trains the brain to associate waking up with immediate external stimulation, rather than with a calmer, self-directed start. Over time, this habit reinforces a kind of reflexive craving for input the moment consciousness returns, something neuroscientists studying attention describe as strengthening pathways associated with reactivity, rather than the pathways associated with calm, focused intention. The brain isn't broken by this habit. It's simply being trained, repeatedly, to expect a very specific kind of morning. Habit 2. Consuming information while eating. Whether it's scrolling a phone, watching a show, or reading the news during every single meal, this habit does something subtle that most people never notice. It disconnects eating from the brain's natural hunger and satiety signals. Digestion and the sense of fullness are deeply tied to attention. When focus is split between eating and consuming unrelated information, the brain processes the meal with meaningfully less awareness, which research on mindful eating consistently links to overeating and a weaker connection to genuine satisfaction from food over time. Beyond the eating itself, doing this at every single meal trains the brain toward a broader pattern, treating unstructured, quiet moments as inherently uncomfortable, moments that need to be filled with something, rather than moments the mind can simply rest inside of. Habit 3. Multitasking during focused work. This habit feels efficient in the moment, and consistently isn't, and the reason has to do with how attention actually works at a neurological level. What feels like doing 2 things simultaneously is, in nearly all cases, the brain rapidly switching back and forth between tasks, and each switch carries a real cognitive cost, a brief lag while the brain reorients itself to the new task. Repeated daily, this habit trains the brain toward increasingly shorter attention spans, essentially reinforcing task switching as the default mode rather than sustained single-focus attention. This is part of why so many people report feeling like their ability to concentrate has noticeably declined over the years. It's not necessarily that concentration itself is gone. It's that the specific neural pathways associated with sustained focus have simply gotten less practice, while the pathways associated with rapid switching have gotten stronger through constant daily reinforcement. Habit 4. Getting inconsistent sleep and wake times. Going to bed and waking up at wildly different times from day to day disrupts something called the circadian rhythm, the brain's internal clock that regulates not just sleep, but hormone release, body temperature, and critically, the brain's overnight process of clearing out cellular waste and consolidating memories from the day. A brain operating on an irregular schedule spends more energy simply trying to figure out what time it is, physiologically speaking, than a brain operating on a consistent rhythm. Over time, this habit is associated with measurably worse memory consolidation, since deep, restorative sleep stages, the ones most responsible for converting short-term experiences into long-term memory, tend to get disrupted or shortened when sleep timing bounces around unpredictably from one night to the next. Habit 5. Avoiding boredom at every opportunity. Reaching for a phone the instant a line gets long, a meeting gets slow, or a moment goes quiet feels harmless. And it's one of the more overlooked habits on this list in terms of its actual impact. Boredom, it turns out, isn't a useless mental state to be eliminated as quickly as possible. It's the specific condition under which the brain's default mode network activates, a network closely linked to creative thinking, memory consolidation, and the kind of unstructured problem solving that produces genuinely original ideas. Constantly filling every idle moment with stimulation prevents this network from ever fully engaging, which means the brain rarely gets the quiet space it needs to make unexpected connections between ideas. Connections that tend to happen specifically during unstimulated, wandering mind states, not during active information consumption. Habit 6. Consistently exercising, even briefly. Here's a habit that works in the opposite direction of most on this list, actively strengthening the brain rather than eroding something. Physical movement, even in short, moderate bursts, triggers the release of a protein called brain-derived neurotrophic factor, which supports the growth of new neural connections and helps protect existing ones. This effect isn't limited to intense hour-long workouts. Even a brisk 20-minute walk, done consistently, is associated with measurable improvements in memory, mood regulation, and the brain's overall resilience to stress over time. The specific mechanism worth understanding here is that this isn't a one-time boost. It's cumulative, each session compounding modestly on the last, which is part of why consistency matters more for this particular habit than intensity does. Habit 7. Consuming primarily negative or outrage-driven content. Content engineered to provoke anger, fear, or outrage tends to be highly effective at capturing attention, precisely because those emotional states trigger a strong stress response, cortisol and adrenaline flooding the system in a way that feels urgent and important, even when the actual content has no real bearing on someone's immediate life. Repeated daily exposure to this kind of content trains the brain toward a heightened baseline of threat detection, essentially keeping the nervous system in a low-grade state of vigilance for longer stretches of the day than it would otherwise need to be. Over time, this habit is associated with elevated baseline anxiety and a skewed perception of how dangerous or hostile the world actually is, not because the world necessarily changed, but because the specific neural pathways associated with threat scanning got so much daily practice. Habit 8. Having real in-person conversations regularly. This is the second habit on this list that actively strengthens the brain rather than eroding it, and its impact is often underestimated. Face-to-face conversation engages a remarkably wide range of brain regions simultaneously, processing tone of voice, facial expression, body language, and verbal content all at once, in real time, in a way that text-based communication simply doesn't replicate. This kind of rich, multi-sensory social interaction is strongly associated with the release of oxytocin and with better long-term outcomes for memory and cognitive resilience, particularly later in life. People who maintain regular, genuine in-person social contact throughout adulthood consistently show better preservation of cognitive function over time than those whose primary social interaction happens through screens, likely because in-person interaction simply demands more from the brain, in a way that turns out to be protective rather than draining. Habit 9. Going to sleep immediately after intense stimulation. Scrolling, watching an emotionally intense show, or engaging in a stressful conversation right before bed keeps the brain in an activated, alert state precisely when it needs to be transitioning toward rest. This delays the onset of the deeper sleep stages responsible for memory consolidation and cellular repair, even if someone technically falls asleep at a reasonable hour. The blue light involved in most screen use compounds this further, suppressing melatonin production and reinforcing to the brain that it's still daytime, working directly against the biological signals that would otherwise be preparing the body for rest. Done nightly, this habit trains the brain toward a shallower, less restorative form of sleep overall, one where the body technically rests, but the deeper repair processes that actually depend on true deep sleep get shortchanged night after night. Here's the pattern running underneath all 9 of these habits, And it's worth naming directly. None of them cause an immediate, noticeable change in a single day. That's exactly what makes them so easy to overlook, and exactly what makes them so powerful over time. The brain doesn't need one dramatic event to change, it needs repetition. And these 9 habits, repeated daily, are quietly, consistently, telling the brain which pathways deserve to get stronger and which ones deserve to fade. The biggest mistake people make with this topic is assuming brain health is primarily about occasional big efforts, an intense workout once a week, a single digital detox weekend, one deep conversation after months of surface level interaction. In reality, the brain responds far more powerfully to what happens consistently, in small doses, every single day, than to what happens intensely but rarely. A habit repeated daily, even a small one, ultimately reshapes the brain more than an intense effort repeated occasionally. So, no, the woman who started leaving her phone in another room during dinner didn't do anything dramatic. She simply removed one small, repeated habit that had been quietly working against her attention every single day and gave a different pathway the chance to get stronger instead. That's really the whole difference. Not one big change. 9 small ones, repeated enough times to become who someone actually is. If any of these 9 habits describe something you're already doing, stick around. Because next time, I'll walk through exactly how long it actually takes for the brain to notice and respond to a new habit, and what that timeline really looks like, week by week.